already let one of them go live, so I'm not sure why.
It says live in the upper corner.
There we go.
It has said live for a few minutes.
All right. We are actually live. So welcome everyone to AAC in the Cloud 2023. We're looking forward to this next session, and I'm just honestly going to pass it over to y'all and let you go at it. So appreciate the time.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So thanks for tuning in. We know it's 5 o'clock Eastern, which is dinner and picking up the kids and hanging out with the family. So we're grateful that you're here with us. We are going to be talking about building AAC capacity through coaching. And we're going to just jump right in so that we can get this ground running, huh?
Before you start,
Yeah.
I think you need to share your screen.
Oh, yeah, that would probably be helpful, huh? See, I was thinking I was already sharing it. So that's why I have Sara here with me. It's beautiful. Okay, so we are talking about building AAC capacity through coaching. So I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Carolyn O'Hearn. I'm an AT-AAC specialist with Alt-Shift. And with me is?
I'm Sara Pericolosi. I am also an AT-AAC specialist with Alt-Shift.
And Alt-Shift is an IDEA grant-funded initiative through the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education. And so here in Michigan, we're actually in Traverse City today. It's beautiful. It's 85 degrees and sunny. So we will be heading outside right after this. Mm-hmm. But what we do is we partner with intermediate school districts to support the administrators and the educators who are therefore supporting the learners. And most of the learners that we are engaged with are AAC users or complex communicators. And a lot of the work that we do ends up falling in the realm of coaching. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
All right. And so before we do that, we want to give you guys a few disclosures. Financially, we are both employed full-time by Alt-Shift. And then non-financially, we are both ASHA members, of course. And we co-host a podcast called All Means All. It's an inclusive education podcast.
And the episodes come out on the first and third Tuesday of every month. And seeing that today was the third Tuesday, we had a new episode go live this morning. So they're available on Spotify and Apple. And it's just us chatting for 15 to 20 minutes about topics that we find to be really important and worthy of others hearing. And we like bringing on guests as well, so that it's not just the two of us talking, but that we bring in other voices to be part of that conversation. So to jump in, we're going to start with a quote from Michael Bungay Stanier from his book, The Advice Trap, which we have all of our books in person with us. And this quote just says, we all have an advice monster. It's an embodiment of that desire we have to leap in and add value by offering a solution. And so when we're thinking about working with AAC users, when we're thinking about working with educators, colleagues, parents, administrators, a lot of times what we want to do is jump right in and give the answer. Oh, well, I've done this before. I have the right answer. Or if someone says, what do I do here? We usually respond with an answer. And then a lot of times we'll hear oh, well, that won't work for my student. That won't work for my classroom. That doesn't work for my family. And so a lot of times, and what we'll get into in a bit, is when people are asking for that help, really, they just want to talk through it. They want to have someone listen, and they want to be able to chat and process and figure out their next steps. And so we say coaching, and this coaching role isn't necessarily just someone who is specifically a coach within a school. This can be a family member or a speech language pathologist or an occupational therapist, an administrator, anyone who is collaborating with those supporting the AAC users. That's what we mean by the coaching role. We are not going to be talking about directly supporting AAC users in this session. In fact, there's an AAC panel going on right now in track 1. I know Mateo Moreno's over there. So if you want to hear from the AAC users on how to support them, we'd love for you to hear their voice by watching their panel. But we're going to be talking more about supporting the AAC users. In our learner objectives today, we're going to dive into 5 simple truths of adult learners. And all of the stakeholders I've talked about so far, and how it can affect collaboration with colleagues and parents and administrators. We're going to describe the 7 partnership principles and how they can be applied within your own respective role. And then we'll summarize how the components of growth coaching can be utilized to enhance educational conversations and outcomes for students. I've got all the quotes today. It's very exciting. So this next quote, we always find things when we're reading, and Sarah and I are really avid readers. So we really like to come in and say, oh, this really stuck with me. And Atul Gawande had this quote that talked about coaching again, that it just says, coaching done well may be the most effective intervention designed for human performance. We know what we know, and when we know better, we do better. And so by being able to talk to each other and talk to others about being better, that's really where that coaching comes in. And that's what we want to make sure we're focusing in on.
All right, my turn.
Your turn.
It's my turn. So when we think about supporting adults and supporting other adults, it is different than supporting students. And that's the first thing that I think we both have learned a lot over the last few years. When we go into teacher mode, when we walk in to support a family or to support another educator, and we treat them as a student, it automatically puts up that wall of defense. It says that we have some expertise that they don't have. And so as you guys are listening to this, think and reflect on, how do you support other adults? What does that look like? And we're going to really talk about these 5 very simple truths and how you can start implementing them today, tomorrow, as you start working with other educators. All right, so the very first one is that most people don't know what it looks like when they do what they do. So a perfect example of this is if you've ever had someone come into your classroom, if it's a coach or an administrator, and they do an observation, and at the end of that observation, they share their takeaways with you, and you're like, man, were we in the same situation? Like my perspective was very different. That's not uncommon. We each bring our own perspectives into an observation. So by training, I am a speech language pathologist. That will always be how I view things. And so somebody that comes in with an occupational therapy background may pick up on things that are different. But those 2 perspectives are both very, very valuable. And so it's one of the things that we do a lot of is we do a lot of video, because then that way we can both sit back and objectively look at the same information. And so when we tend to come in, like Carolyn said, as the advice monster, we want to help. And we say, hey, here are the things that I saw. Sometimes people meet us with resistance because that wasn't their experience. And it's really important to note that both of those perspectives need to be valued, and they can both be true at the same time.
So simple truth number 2 is people take it personally when we talk about their practice. This truth really is centered around identity. We have biased perceptions and stories of ourselves and our work and our impact on goals and outcomes. And so when an educator approaches a family member about the way they're doing something, or maybe not doing something, the family might be offended by the thought that they're not doing something good enough. Like what they're doing just isn't good enough. Even though that's not usually the intended message from the educator, it's really important for us to recognize that everyone's trying their best, and we need to be mindful on how we approach, suggest, or talk about making changes.
All right, so this 3rd truth, when we do the thinking for them, for others, they resist. And again, it's really hard to feel supported when you feel like that person is coming in saying, I know better. We really need to recognize that the experiences and knowledge that I have may be different than Carolyn. When we think about families, they know their children better than we ever will. When I think about the idea of I'm coming in as an ancillary staff, as a service provider, that teacher spends so much more time with that student. And so Carolyn referenced this in the beginning, but if I walk in and I say, hey, here's a solution to the problem that you're having, oftentimes we hear, I've already tried that and it didn't work. If they do try the solution we provided and it didn't work, that can also backfire on us. And so a lot of this is coming in and offering to be a thought partner versus coming in as the expert that has all of the solutions. And so it's really that idea of being humble, and being vulnerable to say, I'm not here to kind of impart that wisdom or that expertise.
This is you too.
Oh, this is me. So this is simple truth number 4. And this work all comes from Jim Knight as well, but in the instructional coaching group, which is one of our favorites. But if people perceive us as putting ourselves one up, they resist. And this is why I have this one, because it really ties to the last one. So even if you are the most supportive and kind and warm person, and you come in, oftentimes people are going to resist and they're going to push back. We need to be open and willing to listen, and not listen to respond, but listen to understand, and to stay curious and learn how to ask better questions, and not provide the answers, avoid being that advice monster, but really be somebody who can ask great questions so that they most oftentimes know the answer. They most oftentimes just need somebody to help them through that. And when we allow them to make those choices, when we walk away, there's such a greater commitment to continuing this work forward.
Yeah, and over in the Slack channel, Kimberly, thank you so much for being so vocal and open in what you're saying. But it says, I also feel like I ask questions to my son's team, and then in the next breath, give them the answer to that question rather than allow them to provide their solutions. And this is a hit or miss, right? There are going to be some times where we come in asking a question because I want you to say the answer I want you to say. And sometimes, and I think this is where that vulnerability piece really comes in, is as an educator sitting at the table or talking about an AAC user, I, as the speech path, I'm not going to have all the answers. And so I'm not going to make up responses. I'm not just going to fill in the silence, but being able to say, that's a really great idea. I don't know. Or, I hadn't thought of it like that. Let's try it. Because worst case scenario, it doesn't work and we come back to the table and say, oh, okay, let's try again. So I love the idea of asking questions, because I think a lot of times if we come with a directive to say we're doing it this way, again, we're gonna get that resistance, and that's exactly what we don't want to see. So our last simple truth number 5, is unless people care about the goal, they are unlikely to achieve it. And this is really hard for both Sara and I, because we are so passionate about AAC users and autonomous communication being the end goal, that I don't care what method they're using to communicate, but if they can say what they want to say, when they want to say it, how they want to say it, to whom they want to say it, or not, they're not being forced to say anything, that's a win. That's what we want to see. And so when we have people who don't quite understand that goal or aren't quite on board yet, which is my favorite word, that's where I tend to push back and be like, no, you have to be on board. This is the goal. This is where we're going. And in reality, we just need to step back and have more conversations about that. So this simple truth is centered all about motivation. When goals are imposed upon a person or a team, whether it's to the family member or to the educator, without that person having a say as to what the goal is, then the likelihood of that person achieving or even attempting to achieve that goal, it just dwindles. So when we think about setting goals, it's really important to make sure that the parties involved care about that goal. This may mean that the goal that's developed isn't exactly how I would have wanted it to be, or how Sara would have wanted, maybe how mom would have wanted it, but it's something that we as a team are coming together and saying, yes, we're all on the same page here. Having an open dialogue with the team member, whether it's family or educator, can really help bring awareness to what needs to be worked on and what's motivating to that particular person. And I think the one person that we haven't talked about in this simple truth is the AAC user themselves. We need to make sure that they are at the table. They have a way to provide their input, because if we're setting the goals for them, it might just be work, right? I'm going to see my device as a work, and I don't want it. I don't need it. I'll communicate a different way, when in reality, we're just trying to provide another means of communication, whether they are interested or not. We're all multimodal. I speak with my hands all the time. We use text. So we're not going to say you have to only use a device, but if I choose a system and I give it to the student and say, here, this is what you're going to use now, we'll see that again too, that we'll see that resistance and just the unwillingness and just the lack of interest, because they didn't have that say going into it. Yeah, so the compliance piece. If people want compliance, that's really hard because we don't like compliance. We don't like checking the box. I mean, we know, so through our jobs, right? So there are some times where we have to check the box. There are things in the IEP that you have to check the box in order for it to finalize, in order for it to be marked in compliance for the state, for the Fed. But really, if it comes down to compliance, that's not communication, right? That's a task. That's if I tell you to do A, you have to do B. And that, it just feels so icky. It's not genuine, authentic interactions and connections. And that's really what communication is all about. So I think when it comes down to compliance and having that question, if that's what their goal is initially, we can talk about how, when is communication for us ever compliance driven? Because more likely than not, if I get an email that I really don't want to respond to, I'm not going to respond to it right that moment. I will, right? It's the common courtesy. And that's something that we need to be teaching our AAC users as well, is we still have to say, well, you might not like them. Here are some strategies so that you don't have to continue to talk to them at this moment. But we can't just completely ghost them, if you will. Anything else about compliance?
I'm just thinking, we're talking a lot about how do we support adults who support AAC users. And so I think sometimes we go back to compliance is very black and white. And it's something that I think a lot of people feel good about because it's like, yes, look I've checked all the boxes and I am compliant. I'm going to throw in my favorite word that Carolyn knows, and it's the why. And so I think sometimes we get it. We're very passionate about what we do. And it's slowing ourselves down to have these conversations with others who aren't there yet and talking about why is autonomous communication important and what is the power of autonomy and really helping people understand so that they aren't focused on compliance, but they are really committed to helping all learners become autonomous communicators.
Yeah, you'll quickly learn that Sara and I have two favorite words, and they're very little, but they pack big punch. So Sara's favorite word is why, and understanding the why behind the work. And mine is yet, because I just feel like that just leaves it open to so much potential. It's not a dead end, right? My student's not communicating yet. My son doesn't want to interact with others yet, right? So there's just a lot of potential there. So we just have to squeak that in. I feel like we always do in every presentation that we do. So in the Slack, I know that there's a few of you over there, and I've been loving the conversation that's happening, but we would love for you guys to reflect yourselves. So when you guys are working with families, if you're an educator, or educators and colleagues, professionals, if you're a family, which of the 5 simple truths rang truest for you? What is something that you're like, that's why I feel resistance, or, oh man, maybe that's why I felt resistance from that other person. So we're going to see if you guys just type in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Those are up on the slide right now. Yeah, Summer. See, Summer's bringing in the yet. Yeah, so they think compliance is learning. The teachers don't understand that children have other things to do yet. Yes, we have other things to do. Other things are more exciting. So sitting there and having to say sun, say red, not fun. I've moved on. I want to go play with whatever my friends are playing with. Absolutely. Okay, number 2. Yeah. People taking it personally when we talk about their practice. Yeah, it's hard to navigate. It's something that we really have to think closely, think carefully about before we just jump in and say, you're doing it wrong. Because that's a really nice way to get people to shut down and say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want you here. Yeah. Christina likes asking why. Yeah, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 is a good one. 5 is a good one. So we hope that you guys take these with you, or maybe even in the next interaction where you're like, why are they pushing back? Why are they so hesitant to join me on this journey? One of these 5 might be ringing true, and we might have to be taking a different approach. Yes.
So the other thing I'm going to say is when you guys leave conversations, and I'm not even going to call them coaching conversations, but opportunities where you guys have talked about growth or learning or goals, pull these 5 back out and start thinking about, okay, what did I do really well? What are some of the areas that I could improve on? For me, when I first learned about these 5 simple truths, it helped me reflect on a relationship I had with a teacher because I unfortunately threw on my advice cape because she asked for help. And I went in providing what I thought were the best answers because, again, I am super passionate about making sure all students have a voice. And she resisted, and not only resisted hard, but in a way that it took me years to repair that relationship. And so real quick, I see, can you remind me of number 5? 5 is really that idea that people need to be emotionally connected to that goal. They need to understand and care deeply about what it is that we're working on.
Yeah. And I think somewhere also you made this mention about schools are so much about coaching people who did not sign up to be coached. And that is something that we have learned from a coach because we wanted to be coached. So we had the opportunity to be coached through the instructional coaching group as well. And something that has really stuck with us is you can't coach the unwilling. If they don't want to be coached, they're not going to be coached. You have to have some openness to the idea of being coached. And so, yeah, we're going to talk all about that when we get to growth, but go ahead.
So that is one thing I'm going to say is you can't coach people that don't want to be coached. But this book, it's the Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But they really talk about developing a coaching way of being so that in all of my interactions, I'm thinking with this frame of reference in mind. So yes, I may not be like a coach or I may not be in a coaching situation, but I can definitely adopt practices that make my just way of being, how I interact with people, more coach-like.
Yeah. And then number 1 is most people don't know what it looks like when they do what they do. So that's where we do a lot of the video feedback. That's why when we're being observed by people, even, as a parent, and I have a speech path coming into the house and I'm living my life and I'm doing my best and we're modeling, and I get feedback from the speech path that says, oh, well, why didn't you do more? And in that moment, I'm thinking, well, I did so many things. I was cooking lunch and I was talking with my son, and I was also getting my daughter's ballet costume or outfit ready. So it's just because we're doing what we do on a regular basis. A lot of time when we're observing or being observed, it's a snippet, it's a timestamp of the day. And so we really can't judge. We can't really judge what's going on when we're seeing other things. The other thing with that too is we might be so hyper focused when we are being observed. And I'm like, oh, I thought I was doing so great with modeling. And meanwhile, the person who comes in to watch or coach says, yeah, but did you see that 4 other students were listening and they were engaged in this work? And it was a really, really well-structured activity. And so just having that mindset that those perspectives aren't wrong. Like Sara said, they both can be true. What the teacher felt and what the observer felt, or what the parent felt and the observer. But we only see what we're seeing and we're attending to at the moment versus everything else that's happening around us.
All right. So we have a question. Would you say that book helps with other professions like ABAs? Yes. For us, we both decided to dive into this book a little bit deeper, and we did it together as a book study. So we would each read a chapter and then come together and have a conversation. And it's something that really, I think, helps us have the same conversation and that we can have these follow-ups. So it's in our resources, but of course, I will hold it up. It's the Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools. And you guys are going to hear a lot more about it in just a few slides. Yeah,
we're going to dive really deep into some of the strategies that are in that book. But I think for the question that was specifically about ABAs, again, it's that openness, it's that readiness to have this coaching mindset, this coaching mentality. There are some people who go to school and it's drill, 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 and that's what I learned and this is what I'm doing. But like I said earlier, we did what we did when we knew what we knew, and now we know better, so do better. And so, thinking of who I was as a speech path 10 years ago, I'd be sitting there, banging my head up against the wall, like, what are you doing? But because I've invested in learning more about coaching and kind of having this different approach, I'm completely different, and I hope I'm more approachable. I don't know. I guess I have to ask the people who I interact with. But it's a little bit different than someone coming in and saying you have to. We're all going to read this coaching book, and you're going to be a good coach. If you go into it with that mindset of this is not for me, and I think this is baloney, that's what they're going to get out of it, unfortunately.
And so we're going to talk, you can go,
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay.
We're going to really talk about 7 partnership principles, and this is really about true partnership. So recognizing that Not one, I am not perfect at all of these. There are some days where I'm like, hey, I'm really great at one, but the other one, this is that idea of how do I come in genuinely understanding that I am a partner, that I am in this with you and we are in it together, ultimately to better serve our students. And so we're going to walk through each one of these. And if we can adopt these partnership principles, if we can reflect on it and be more willing to really just be honest with ourselves, we might see individuals who are more willing to understand the why, who are willing to move away from compliance to really start thinking about communication as a connection, as autonomy.
And as Sarah's going to kick us off with these, but just as she goes through them, there's no way that we can be amazing in all 7. We can strive for it. But if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I'm good in like 4 of those 7, that's really great. So don't take it negatively. Don't bounce away. It's very much the fact that, you know, we are moving forward. We are finding areas that we can maybe be a little more partner-like in other conversations that maybe we weren't before.
All right, so the first one I'm going to kick us off with is equality. And this does not mean that everyone is the same. We all have different strengths. We have different skills, different areas of growth. But what this does mean is that everybody counts the same. Everyone is as important as anyone else is on this team. And that really includes our families, it includes our caregivers, and especially our students. We want to make sure that students have a voice at the table. And that we really are creating opportunities and environments that equality exists, where people feel safe to share their experiences, their perspectives, their observations in a way that they understand that voice means the same. And so sometimes I think we have this idea that an administrator, that their voice trumps all. And it's this idea of how can we create opportunities where everyone can come to the table together. All right. I also get the second one, which is choice. And we talked a little bit about this when we talked about the 5 simple truths. But this idea is that when we offer more choices, even to adult learners, it really fosters ideas of professionalism and it increases engagement and commitment. And not commitment as compliance, but as commitment that when that coach walks away, they are personally vested. If implementation isn't going well, giving people choices, and if they select a choice, and you know what, like this really isn't working, Carolyn, what do we do? It's something that I chose myself versus Carolyn coming in and saying, Sarah, you will do this. So really giving people that choice and that option. And some of this is really listening to others and asking them what options do they think or what options do they see moving forward.
And this kind of combats that compliance mindset. If we're, there are some things, like we said, by law, we're required to do them, but where is there some wiggle room so that maybe class A is getting to the vision, getting to that goal, but they're doing it a little bit differently than class B is, but we're still moving in the right direction. We're still saying, yes, we're providing our AAC users with robust vocabulary and everyone's modeling and AAC goes wherever we go. But maybe it looks a little bit differently because of the unique needs of the students. And so I think that's the other thing with choice is making sure that, yes, we're providing choice and everyone is, like you were saying, giving their own options, giving their thoughts to what that choice looks like. So number 3 is voice, and this really stems nicely from that choice principle. This is just the fact that people need to feel safe to say what they think. The last thing we want to do is have a meeting or have a conversation where one person is talking and pretty much dictating, this is what we're going to do. This, I know the best, I know the most, I've done the most research, and that might be the case where I come in having a lot more experience than someone who's fresh out of grad school, but they know the students, they know the classrooms, they know the culture that surrounds all of this. So we want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to say what they think. And beyond just being able to say it, I mean, that really requires that vulnerability from all sides and that ability to take risks and to say what I'm thinking, even though my idea might not get picked and my idea might be not the greatest, but still being able to put it out there and feeling like my voice was heard. right? So, oh, that's an interesting idea. Here's why we aren't selecting that, or we've tried that before. Here's why it didn't work, but thanks for bringing that back to our attention because we had to review that. So just understanding that, yes, voices matter, but just because my voice matters at the table doesn't always mean that my opinion is going to be the one that's selected and listened to. And voice is really central to someone's deep engagement and happiness with their work. I think that's one of the things, if you go to a classroom or if you're going to a staff meeting and you ask for their opinions or their ideas and it's crickets, silence, that makes me wonder if this is a culture that really values voice and values other ideas and values opinions. So we want to make sure that the voices are being heard. From voice, we have dialogue, and this also stems really nicely. They're all really intermixed and intertwined together. But everyone at the table feels that they can say what they think about the situation and be honest, but the person who's going to be taking action is the one that makes that final decision. So going back to voice and saying what they want to say, but ultimately, I'm the classroom teacher, or I'm the person who's directly working with the AACs, or I'm the parent who's going to be implementing some of this at home. They're the ones that are going to say, oh yeah, that's the idea I really want to sit and run with. We as the coaches can't say, oh, we heard your ideas, that was great, but nope, we're going to go back to mine anyway, thanks. Because again, that makes it seem like the voices aren't valued. So these are really play off nicely from each other. Here's something that, here are some thoughts. What do you think? But you're the one who's going to actually implement this with the students. What do you want to do? That's definitely the approach that we're going to want to take from the coaching standpoint. That really feels more partnership-like rather than saying, hey, what are your ideas? But also, I already have the plan put in mind and set forth. We're not going to try to guide someone's behavior or have them make their decision or conclusion. We're not going to guilt them into making the decision that we want them to make. And that's really hard sometimes, especially if they're going off in a way that maybe we don't want them to. Maybe we have experienced this before and the situation is very similar to a past fail, I guess I'll say. I didn't want to say fail, but a past flop, if you will. But sometimes learning needs to happen, right? So if they really are gung-ho about this one idea, we're going to do an AAC modeling competition in our school, and this is what it's going to look like, and here's how we're going to do it. I've done those in my programs, and I have some feedback and I have some ideas, but if they don't take what I've learned from it, that's fine. You can learn on your own. And so maybe what you do with your modeling competition, you'll determine for the next one, or the next time you want to do something like that, you can learn from it and say, oh, I learned this, or we're never doing this again. Maybe we need to do something else, or, oh, our staff, they're not really competitive. This was not the right approach for our staff. Or you'll see that they really were competitive, which is what I found out in my situation. So we were able to capitalize on that competitive nature of some of the teachers.
Well, and I think this is referenced in the Slack channel too, is that idea of sometimes I ask questions and then respond right away with the answers that I want the team to have. And so this is one of those, Carolyn's going to talk about it in a second, but this is one of those opportunities where we have to be really intentional with how am I asking the questions? What is my behavior saying to the people that are sitting around the table? And taking some of that time to slow down and really think. Because again, with dialogue, it's not that idea of like, I'm going to get you, or I'm going to ask the right questions to frame this in a way that I want this to move forward. But it's really this idea that I'm going to say this again and again, but many heads together are always better than one. Mm-hmm. And so that difference of perspectives will often lead to a much stronger outcome for our learners.
Yeah, if we think about it, it can't be on the shoulders of one person. It can't just be on our parents. It can't be on the speech path's shoulders. We did not learn to speak from just having one person speaking with us. We had a whole community. And so that's why it really does make a difference having multiple voices and being able to have those ideas thrown around at the table together. Number 5 is reflection. And this one's always fun because this is a really great opportunity to think, where do we think this problem came from? what's it like now? And what do we actually want this to look like in the future? And so this is a really nice way to get on board with somebody. They might come and just start venting about all these things. Okay, well, what do you want this to look like? And so really flipping it so it doesn't come in for us with that advice monster again. But us being coaches and someone in that coaching role, we need to encourage voice, but we also need to gather more information. I can't just ask questions and then not provide any sort of input myself, but I need to be able to ask the right questions. And so reflecting on, well, what have we tried before? Or what do we think is the best? Or, what that activity looked great to me on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put it? And how can we get that closer to a 10? And so that really opens it up to, that you're asking me what I think I could make it better next time. Or, I thought it was a 6. Okay, hey, what do you think made that a 6? Because even at that, you could have put it at a 2. So obviously you thought you were doing something right. Let's talk about those really great things and how we can build that up too.
Right. So the 6th one that we're going to talk about is praxis. And this is really an inquiry-based approach to professional learning. So if I could tell you anything, it's call off the fidelity police. This is not about that compliance. It's about really helping people deeply understand and learn a practice. And so how do we do that? What does that look like? It's often, hey, here is this evidence-based approach, right? So I'm going to say comprehensive literacy is an example. So here is comprehensive literacy. Here's how emergent literacy can be used. These are the type of learners that we're talking about. Hey, do you think this will work with the students in your classroom? Is there anything that you might need to modify to help meet their needs? What questions do you have? How are we going to collect data to help us understand, is this practice having the impact on our students that we really want it to have? And then, like Carolyn just said a minute ago, really taking the time to reflect on the work that we're doing. And when we think about praxis, it really allows people that opportunity to learn how to use something. And eventually that fidelity comes, but it gives them the permission to take risks, to try something without that fear of an administrator or somebody coming in and saying it is not written as XYZ. So earlier today, I was having a conversation with the director of special education, and he said, I have yet to find a curriculum that is appropriate for all of the students in our program. And he said, and I'm very wary of like a one size fits all. And this is that idea that we need to be able to have praxis. We need to be able to adopt and adapt and modify and reflect and understand why we're changing something. But it definitely can't be, here is this black and white checklist, and this is exactly what you need to do for your learners.
I think people need to own the strategies that are being suggested, right? So think about any of the AAC tools that you're familiar with. You didn't just know how to do it after a day. You had to have that, again, that vulnerability, that risk taking of saying, okay, how do I say this? Or what can I say in this folder? Or how do I add a word? How do I add pictures? Because I know that this student really likes Bob's Burgers or whatever. We want to make sure that this is meaningful for them. And we know that they might want to watch that show. We need a way for them to say that. And so having that inquiry is really going to be crucial for figuring out what the next steps are.
All right. And so the last partnership principle is reciprocity. And this is the idea that everyone is learning. So if I'm coming in as a coach, I understand and recognize that I am also learning from this situation. I'm not an expert giver. I'm not the advice person. I'm here really as a learner. And so when I come into any type of interaction with somebody, recognizing that I too have something to learn from that. And I think it helps us become more vulnerable. It helps make sure that we aren't coming in as one up than the other person. And it's really making sure to kind of have that internal clock and reflecting, like, how am I engaging in this interaction? Am I placing myself in a position of learning alongside of this teacher or this family member? And again, these are 7 partnership principles. We promise you that there are some that you guys may feel you do better or come more naturally, and others that you definitely need to work on a little bit more.
Well, and I think back to this last one, reciprocity. When I first came into this role, I would go to different school districts with my pod communication book, and they'd say, how do we do this? And I'd say, oh, this is how you do it. And I kind of had that expert mindset, which, again, I know better, so I'm doing better. But you kind of have this, I'm going to tell you what to do. And they seemed to receive that. And as soon as I started shifting to more of the inquiry based of, hey, what do you think we need to do differently? Or how are things going? How do we need to improve? It turned into a different conversation, and it was deeper, and it allowed us to form some really, really open relationships. And so I think and now I can take my experiences with that, and I can connect other people to say, oh, hey, I learned about this at this one school district, and this other school district's going through the same thing. I want you guys to connect, to talk to each other instead of me coming in and pretending I know all the answers, because I definitely don't. So in the chat, we would love for you guys to think about what those partnership principles are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back a slide so you can see them again. But which ones do you often engage with the most? So which ones do you feel like, oh yeah, I'm really good at equality, right? That seems to be I was really strong at making sure everyone here has equal weight or voice. I make sure that I hear everyone's ideas. And what principles might be areas of growth for you. And these all come from unmistakable impact. This again is linked at the end of our slide deck, and I think our slides are already linked on the platform. But this is unmistakable impact from Jim Knight. So I'm going to go back just one. We're going to check in the Slack. So which one of these do you guys really think, yeah, I'm good at this. I do this in a lot of my interactions. It's that fun lag wait time. If you had us in person, we'd have like dancey music.
Yes.
Sarah, perfect. So Summer said reflection. Yeah, that's great. That is a really great one. How can we continue to learn and reflect on what we've done already and how we want to change moving forward? Sarah, what do you think is your strongest partnership principle?
Oh,
I know that I'm throwing her in the spotlight right now.
My strongest partnership, I would say most likely voice.
Yeah.
Because I am really big about making sure that everyone feels valued and can feel safe. I've seen situations where people don't have that safety and the impact that it makes. I know somebody threw in the chat earlier, now this is making sense why so many implementation efforts have failed. And I think it's sometimes because we haven't ensured that these things are in place. These are foundational skills that will help us move forward. With that being said, I think I can look at some of the relationships that I have with some, and I might say, voice isn't my strong suit. So I think it's not that, these 7 partnership principles I apply to everything. It's really thinking about what does my relationship look like or that partnership look like with this group versus another.
Yeah. Okay. So Summer and Brandy, I'm just gonna come real close. It's okay. Right. That's why before we even jumped into this, we said, don't feel defeated if we're not doing these yet. See, there's my favorite word again. That's why it's my favorite. I think this is the thing is Brandy, the fact that you said dialogue and reflection, you're doing a lot of those, but honing in on which two that you specifically found. The fact that you're engaging in conversation and you're making sure that both people or both sides or all sides are having their voices heard, and then the person who's going to be doing it is the one that makes the decision. Beautiful. Same thing with the reflection. Equality and voice. Yeah, Becca, you know what? I think equality is one of my stronger ones too. I like that too, because there are so many opportunities where they don't get a chance to say what they think, and they're not at the table and they don't have an opportunity to express their ideas. And so that's been something I've really been working on over the past few years. And that's the thing. We've been doing this for years and we're still not stellar in all 7. And it ebbs and flows. It really depends on the nature of the work we're doing, depends on our working relationship. Obviously, I have more of these embedded in the partnerships of the teams that I've been working with a lot longer. My newer ones, I'm for sure going to focus on equality, choice, and voice. Those are the easier ones, the kind of the more surface level ones, before diving deeper into like, hey, I need to actually be learning from you at the same time. Yeah. Oh yeah. Kimberly
So-
likes praxis. Good. Yeah.
I think Kim and Summer both hit that point of having that expert. We talk a lot about moving away from that expert model. And we often get people who want the answer, right? So like, I'm struggling with this and give me the answer. What we find time and time again is that doesn't work. And we've all done that where we put on our speech capes or we put on our OT or our PT or our parent capes. And we think we have the solution, but it fails time and time again. And it's really because we haven't allowed all of the voices to come together. And if we create opportunities for equality and voice at a table, and we truly ask what we're coming to next in these next few, we're going to give you guys some tools. So if you're like, hey man, like, yes, I want to figure out like, how do I give people choice and what does reciprocity look like? And give me something that I can actually use. That is coming next. And we've seen the power of growth coaching, and it pulls all of this together. It's taking ideas and voices and perspectives and helping give a format and a path forward to making sure that all those voices are together. And it helps us move away from that expert model.
Yeah, I completely agree. So checking the time, we have about 15 minutes left. So we're going to jump right into growth coaching, and I'm going to let Sarah kick us off.
All right. So again, you guys, here's the book. Throw it in. And here's the other thing that I love. Can you see it's very thin and it's super easy to read. And one of the things though, when we think about growth coaching is it's really meant to be succinct. So when we use these long words or paragraphs, it often convolutes our message. And so it's really important to think about what am I trying to say and how is it best to say it? And when we think about it, it's this idea, and you just mentioned it, of building relationships, of figuring out how can I create a toolbox that has really great questions in it. And then I promise you that as you start to do growth coaching, and you don't even have to like say to somebody like, hey, we're going to do growth coaching. We've had a lot of teams that we've worked with after the fact, when we talk to them about growth coaching a couple months later or a year later, they're like, oh my gosh, you guys have been growth coaching us.
Yes,
we have. But it's really this idea of having some of these questions in your toolbox and knowing when to pull them out. All right. So first thing is we need to build relationships with people. We need to create that safe space. It's a lot of what we just talked about. When we reconnect for a follow-up conversation, one of the very first things that I ask is, how have things improved since the last time? Or I look at the notes that I've taken and I ask them specifically, hey, last time we were together, you really wanted to focus on X. Tell me a little bit about how that's going. So you're really establishing that connection. And it's about actively listening. So if there's one thing that I can tell you about coaching, it's you have to be present and in the moment. This is not a great time to be multitasking. It's not a great time to be doing other things. It's truly being present and also recognizing the need for confidentiality and also thinking about how do I minimize that differential between I'm the coach, which sometimes can be seen as an expert, and you are the learner. Or the teacher, the family or educator. And so it's really building that genuine rapport, and just a lot of it also comes from us risk taking. So a lot of times when we do sessions, one of the first things we say is, hey guys, we don't have all the answers. So if you have questions or something doesn't make sense, push back on me. And I think sometimes that helps create that sense of trust.
I would agree with that. So growth is an acronym. I'm going to slip back a few. So you'll see growth is this acronym, and so each of the letters apply to one of the letters of growth, which is why we keep saying growth. And the G is goals. So when we're exploring the goal, we want to encourage the coachee to build a really detailed vision of the preferred future. What would success look like? What would it feel like? What are little steps we can take to move in that direction? And so you'll see that over on the left-hand side of the screen, we have what goals, like what's the purpose? What's the purpose of G, the goals section? And then there's some sample questions that you can actually use with the people that you're interacting with. And it could be you coaching them. It could just be in a conversation with them, right? Sometimes people come in like, can I just have a vent session? It's really great to listen and be like, oh, well, what do you want to achieve? What do you want this to look like? And get them flipping from, I'm going to vent about everything to, oh, hey, I actually can walk away with something tangible to do about this. But working step by step inflexibly and rigidly towards an outdated goal, that can be unhelpful. So each time that we're connecting, we can say, is this still something that you're motivated to work on? Is this something that's important to you? Because sometimes, as you guys all know, we'll have student changes, or maybe there's behaviors or puberty happens, or we get more students or fewer staff, or life just happens. And so the goal that we worked on last month might not be the goal this month. We need to completely sidetrack, do something else. And that's okay. We're following their lead. But there's a risk about taking this approach towards using one goal and following it for the entire year. And that can lead to undue stress and a lack of awareness that circumstances have changed. The last thing we want to do is come and be like, well, why didn't you do that goal? You said you were going to work on that. Why didn't you do that? Which is very much why Sara said, hey, last time we talked about this, how's that going for you? Tell me a little bit about it, because then we can get a really clear picture from the get-go of, oh, I don't even want to talk about it. Okay, hey, well, what's on your mind? Let's move away from that and talk about something else. The other quick ideas are just to help the coachee reframe challenging situations so other perspectives can enlarge the dimensions of this topic, so we can look a little bit deeper and really explore what it will feel like to achieve the outcomes being considered.
All right, so the next one in growth is R, and that really stands for the reality. So what is the current reality? When you're going through, again, there's the sample questions, and I know you guys can read those, so I'm going to leave them there. But as you are asking these questions, really take an opportunity to focus on strengths, or to call those strengths out, because it helps create this idea of hope, right? We all need hope. We know the work that we do is challenging and hard, but when we can create hope for people, it helps sustain that effort. Again, similar to that is we're focusing on progress. Okay, yep, this is the current reality, but what did this look like 3 months ago? Think back when we first started coaching, what did this look like? Pulling attention to the resources that they have available really, again, gives opportunities to move forward. So instead of just that kind of vent session, is really looking at what opportunities are there? What resources do you have? And then one of our favorite questions is, what else? So what else is there? And it really opens up that idea to think outside of the box. And again, asking in more of a curious tone instead of like that drill sergeant and what else. My husband's a police officer. He's very like drill sergeant-y. So avoid that. But it's really this idea of how can we develop a clear picture of reality so that we know how can we best move forward, which is the next one that's coming up.
Yeah. Kim, I do see your question. We're gonna touch on that right at the very end. So I do see it. We haven't forgotten about you. O is options. And so again, we've got the gist of it, as well as some of those sample questions. But here in options, this is where we take them from what else is going on, what else is the reality, to really thinking, what could we do? So we really want to encourage that new thinking. And this is where we often hear, just tell me what to do. I don't know. You tell me what the options are. You tell me what I can do. And that's so demeaning and so just down. We want to flip that script. So we might be like, okay, so what's the opposite action to what you've been taking so far? Or what ideas would you give to other people in this situation? So flipping it away from the fact that, I'm hyper focused on the fact that I don't know what to do. When in reality, they might have an idea. It's just not conscious yet. And inviting this choice really highlights autonomy, which is, again, something that we love, but we really want to keep the options light and fun. So we want to bring some positive emotions to this. That's why we have really positive words in those sample questions. And there might be moments that we really don't know what they could do. And so we can offer some ideas of like, I've seen families try this and others do this. And I've seen even others do this other one. So we're not completely banned from giving choices, but we aren't going to be the ones who are solely imposing those. If they really are just like, I have no idea. Okay, well, here's XYZ. Which one of those would you want to dive into, and leaving that open and up to them?
Again, it's the choices. So this next one that we're going to talk, you're going to see W, T, and H all on one slide, and those are all mine. But this is really the action plan. So this is, now that we've talked about options, now that even we've given some choices, the W is what way is forward? What will we do? And so some of those questions that we ask are the same questions that we asked in options But instead of saying, what could you do? We change the language to what will you do? And it's really this idea of helping them develop, this is the way forward. So now that I know what my goal is, I've seen what the current reality looks like. I've explored all the options that are out there. This is my path forward, and this is what I'm going to do. When we move beyond the W, we move into the tactics. And this is really those small action steps. This is kind of the meat and the potatoes of what they're going to do. And it's really important that those first couple steps are something that they can accomplish that's going to help create momentum and that progress and that hope and that sense of excitement. And this is where we talked about initially that sometimes people might choose a goal that we wouldn't choose. But if it's emotionally compelling to them, if it's something that they feel is going to impact their students, and then they start to see progress and it happens, it's building our own credibility in the process as well as ourselves. When we think about H, it's really this idea of what are the habits that are going to sustain this work forward. Again, we want to be really strengths-based. So how can we affirm the strengths that they have, help them really connect to the resources that are available to them?
And then my favorite part of the coaching process is really celebrating the wins. And these are not only when they achieve the goal that they talked about. It's not only when we get these big celebrations we can do, it's the little things. Hey, I'm so glad you were able to find time for me today. Let's celebrate that. Like, clearly things have died down a little bit. Love this. You were able to step out of the classroom. Or, hey, I saw that you were modeling at home yesterday, and I loved that. You were doing such a really great job. Or, oh, I saw that you were bringing some other students to work together, and inviting that connection. And it doesn't have to be something enormous, right? Even if it's just that they felt that their activity moved from a 6 to a 7, that's a huge win. Let's celebrate that. And so it might take a little coercing to pull it out of them of like, what can we celebrate today? But remembering that it's really easy to feel bogged down. This work is hard. This is not what we thought life was going to be for any of us. So how can we celebrate the little things that are coming through from it? So the question from Kim over in the Slack channel was, how can we get others to a place where we can even begin the process of coaching? And I go back to Sarah's favorite word, is making sure that the right people understand the why. Why do we even think coaching is relevant here? Why do we think that it would be helpful here? And how can we talk as a team to build it into times that we already have? The last thing we want to do is say, hey, your coaching's at 5 o'clock tonight, because guess what? At 2:30, my day ends and I'm going home and I don't want to be coached at that point. But we can also ask teachers as well, hey, is there a time of the day where it's a little bit quieter so that we can chat? You know, in my last position between 7:30 and 8 was teacher planning. Things are getting ready. And if they're making copies or they're setting the room up, hey, can I come in and help you set your room up? And then we can just talk to each other. We love taking notes and really coming back to give them just some tangible evidence of the coaching session and just some things to remind them of what we talked about. But there are often times where you're doing coaching on the fly, and it doesn't have to be this, you know, huge setup of I'm coming in between 1:15 and 1:35, and then I'm going to the next one from 1:35 to 1:50. It really is. It's whatever works for you, whatever works for admin, because you want to make sure that they're on board to support this, but then also what works for the person who you'd like to be the coachee.
And Kim, to your question, the other part I think about this is when you give them that choice and you come in as a partner and you help, even if it's one person that says, hey, I'm willing to try this out and see what this feels like. And you start there and they start to see the impact that it can have in their classroom. It's not going to feel like something else that they have to do. They're going to start seeking you out. And we do that together all the time. Like I'll call Carolyn and say, hey, I'm at this barrier, or I know that I have a goal, but I need somebody as a thought partner. And how do I move forward? And so it's not always one more thing. It's how can, again, I'm going to go back to this book, like how can we start to develop a coaching way of being so it's not seen as something additional?
Yeah. So because of time, we're not able to do this reflection, but on your own, reflect on what some of those things are that are going really well, and maybe some of those areas that you might get caught up or stuck in. And then go back to those slides. Like I said, we submitted them already, so you have access to those, or find the book. It's a really great one. We have notes all over. But review those and figure out what questions could we be asking, because even at the table, it doesn't have to be a full-on coaching session. It could just be, hey, we're at an IEP meeting. Let's talk about how we can move forward as a team and work collectively here. On the screen now, I've shared our contact information. So those are our emails, those are our Twitter. We are very active over on Twitter. But like Sarah said at the beginning, we have a podcast called All Means All. We launched another episode today. And so we also have our podcast Facebook, our podcast Twitter, and then we also now have a website, which I'm going to click over to. You're going to lose the captions real quick. But you can see our podcast is there, what presentations we've presented on before, and then if you want to connect with us, so who we are, and then having that opportunity to connect with us. So we just want to say thank you so much. We know that there were some really great sessions today, but thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to connect with you guys at a later date.
Definitely. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Well, we appreciate it. There was some things going on in the background. Luckily, it stayed up on your end.
Oh, good.
Thanks again, Sarah and Carolyn. We appreciate you being part of our sessions, and hope that you'll look at doing it again in the future.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.